Oh, okay. Thank you. So I've been introducing all the speakers. It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, which is myself. So thank you again for this. This is the second day of Exponential, and I'm so glad that we've been able to share a lot of our stories. I'm glad again that Shalini was is able to join us today from NASCOM. So today, what I want to talk about, as you can see, is a pretty serious topic of responsible design. And it is not a presentation that I want to share that, oh, this is the way to do, and then let's sort of change the world and so on. But it's about a conversation that I want to start off. It's an evolving conversation that all of us, I believe, should be part of and should have a point of view. Because what I believe in is that design is the conscience of an organization. It holds the conscience, and it therefore needs to take a stand on what we are going to do and what we don't. And therefore, you think very differently when you start looking at design, not as a set of output that you come out with based on requirements, but actually when it is the very purpose or the conscience of why an organization exists. When we start thinking like that, then you start unpacking this whole thing, which is responsible design leadership. And each of the word has a profound meaning to it. But before that, for those who are joining in from various non-IX entities, be it our larger CIC or from external folks such as NASCOM, I want to just give a quick introduction around what is design for IBM and what does it mean. Right. My name is Sudhindra. As we all know, I'm the Chief Design Officer for IBM iX in India, and I practice human-centered design. And the reason I do human-centered design is because the human-centeredness is built into design. You've not heard of a human-centered finance, for example, have you? Right? Or human-centered some other practice. But design is automatically from day one has that human-centeredness in it. So which I feel is very heartening for me specifically and for a lot of designers. And therefore, I continue to do design, and therefore it is our imperative and responsibility to start expanding that conversation from where we started to encompass a much larger canvas than what we do today. We started off in IBM. Some of you already, of course, know this, and we were just talking today morning on how design has evolved in IBM. This was back in, I guess, in 1973, when Thomas Watson Jr. wrote this memo, and he said, "Good design is good business." And we started engaging with some really, really senior, well-known design thought leaders at that time. So design has been around in IBM for a very long time, but somewhere along the way, it went into different shape and form. In 2039, it came back in a much bigger, better, larger version when we had Phil Gilbert join us. And that's when we started creating the whole practice around design and what we can do around design thinking. So that's what we embarked on in IBM. So when we talk about design thinking, the story starts from 2013, and the way we are encompassing now is a completely measured approach, a thoughtful approach of embedding design in all that we do in IBM. People, practices, places is what gives us outcomes, was the thought process, which we continue to have today across the 57 studios, which are custodians in some sense of the design practice itself. We use enterprise design thinking, as we all know, for those who are not initiated. So it is called the loop as well, right? The enterprise design thinking framework. It has observing, reflection, and making at the heart of it, and flanked by the principles and the keys of doing the right kind of design through a focus on user outcomes, in reinventing restlessly, as well as empowered teams which are multifunctional. So you keep yourself on the ground through the hills, playbacks, as well as the sponsor users. We have a whole paths of design through the badges and all of that. So we have a career path. We have instituted lots of knowledge material. We work with universities to make sure that they're design enabled. So that's the context in which we like to see now the next evolution of how we want to see design and the importance of it. So that's where responsible design leadership for me comes in. Do bring in your questions as we go along. But if you kind of play this out, you can also see it in different notions, right? So one is responsible design leadership, but also designing responsible leadership. That's the other way to look at it. So if you just play around with these, it is a pretty profound thought. And as you unpack every single word, you can start seeing much larger things unfold in front of us. So, I'll give you examples on why it is important and how we probably need to look at in some of the practical examples that we have. So we all know Airbnb, right? And Airbnb and Uber are, in some sense, the flag bearers of the new age economy and so on. But then they also have illustrated to us on what can be irresponsible design, right? So you can do responsible design, you can do irresponsible design, you can do no harm design. So it's about our choice that we make, and it's a pretty difficult one to do. But then let's look at what are the examples that we have around, and what I mean by irresponsible design. So Airbnb, when they launched so we know the idea of Airbnb. It has hosts and it has guests, and they kind of combine them, right? So they bring them together. So their motto is to have everybody belong everywhere. So that's the motto of Airbnb. But are they really doing that? That's the question. So what they do is they have these profile pictures of everybody in Airbnb, and it is very important that you update profile pictures. Very important to build trust. But at the same time, when this was seen by some hosts who had racist tendencies, they started rejecting people who they did not like, right? Because of the profile picture. So some racist people do that. They took that and started blocking them. Now, what does that mean? It means that the very thing that you're trying to do, the kind of thing that you want to create, is actually also creating a negative impact on some people, because of we have so many different issues that are in the society today. But that is what happened. So when because of the racist tendencies, some of those profiles did not go through, and they had difficulty going through, right? So these are some things that you don't see as a designer until you see it happening. And then how quickly can you adapt in the first place? And is there a way to see it before is what we need to look at. The kind of values that we now espouse in the society, the kind of responsibilities that we have is what we need to start looking at. So that is an example of how people can use it in different ways. And therefore, designers need to think much larger and much deeper than what they're doing today. Uber, again, you can see that beautiful poster of safety in riding, right? They talk about safety quite a lot today. But are they really safe? If we look at Uber, the story of Uber, especially in India, when they came into India, the way they came was through incentives to drivers. And they used the gamification to actually incentivize them more and more. And you have all these drivers competing and trying to make as much money as they can, given that they have a limited period, and they have all these leaderboards and gamified systems to catch up to. Because of that, now, because of the fact their incentives, so gamification, when done at a life scale, is very different. And when you do it for just, around some other not so harmful ones, it's very different. These were life and death situations of drivers because they actually spent a lot of time earning that money to feed their families. So gamification became their life and death thing. Because of that, they started working harder and harder and harder, because of which we now see lots of unsafe drivers. They don't have right sleep, they don't have the right kind of safety consciousness, and all of that we see today in the driver partners of Uber. Because of the fact that that entire system is gamified, and they need to meet those targets and goals, right? So they have actually bought their cars on EMIs and incentive and the money that they hopefully will make. And if they don't make, it is not just a small little issue, but the very loss of probably their livelihood for that month. So it becomes very difficult, and then therefore they go into all kinds of unsafe and hazardous acts of driving. They don't sleep very well enough because they need to meet their incentive targets. So the question here is, therefore, is Uber really giving a safety for the passengers at the end of the day, and even for the drivers for that matter? Are they looking at all of them? When they introduced the incentive system, did they know all of that? Right. So that's the question that we all need to think of based on these examples. So to give you some of the examples that we have undergone as well, right? We did the work in Godrej, right? So we did some amazing work for Godrej Interior. We brought their entire furniture online. But then, if you had the responsible design notion at the time, we would have asked, what are you going to, what are you allowing the buyers, the purchasers, with their old furniture? What are you getting them to do? Is there a way we can dispose them, right? What will they do after they buy the furniture and when the furniture exits that life cycle? So we think through the whole product life cycle as opposed to getting an e-commerce engine up there and then helping people buy more furniture. So that kind of canvas of our questioning, the canvas of our thought process becomes much broader when you use the responsible design lens. Even now, we're working on practice leader dashboard, for example, right? So we're creating dashboards for practice leaders to be used. Are we thinking of how that can probably create bias in some of the practice leaders in their hiring decisions, in the decisions that they make across different practices? Are we giving the thought in there? Are we consciously designing elements that does not create bias, or it actually reduces or suppresses that could be the bias that could be there in some people, right? Are we doing things so that some of the elements of the society who might use it for undesired consequences, how are we sort of mitigating them? All of those questions today we don't ask enough, I believe, right? So in our conversations with clients, we are actually even today, whether it is designers, non-designers, design thinkers of various shape and sizes, what we do is we still are looking at the business angle, which is important. But then beyond that, what happens in the society is the question I believe we should ask. And these are examples, right? Airbnb and Uber and some of the other examples. So we have been, all of these designers so far has been doing user experience design and, largely, right? We've been graphic designers, product designers, all of that stuff. But today, we are explorers of a multi-dimensional space. So in this space, there is empathy that coexists with robotics, with automation, with a humanitarian, a human coexists with robot. Emotion exists with intelligence. All of that are existing in this one multi-dimensional space, and we are actually designers of this space. So therefore, we should start thinking differently, as opposed to a product designer, a user experience designer, or an industrial designer. We should start thinking ourselves as leaders of change, and only when you do that is when we can bring in the responsible design practice alive. When I say designer, I also am kind of synonymously using it with design thinkers, largely people who are involved in affecting change and bringing in change through the practices of design thinking. So I'm kind of synonymously using it, so read it from that angle. And therefore, the question is, designer, what is the kind of world that you want to create, right? So as Tim Brown says, designers create a world in their mind before anybody else. And that's the power that we have. You create a world which nobody else has seen yet, and you have the power to bring it to life. So you got to think of what kind of world that you want to create. You want to create a world which is, thriving from a business angle. So the DMI, the Design Management Institute in the UK, put together a study in which they were able to map over a 10-year period the fact that design-led organizations are way ahead of the curve, 228% to be precise in that study. People who rode the D wave, they call it the D wave. So if you're riding the D wave, you're far better off than other organizations anyway. They also said 80% plus companies introduced new products and services, increased their market share, also went into international markets. And those companies that employed design practices in the right way. So the numbers are there for us to take. It's very clear. IBM has done its own study in which we saw a huge uptake in design as well. When we did from Forrester, McKinsey recently released. So the numbers, there is no dearth of numbers telling us on how important it is to have a design-led view. But if you stop at that, I believe we are probably shortchanging design. If you stop at the fact that saying that, I'm going to create even more numbers and even more businesses, can we look at different kinds of value that we can unlock when we create systems for our clients? So that's really a call that we need to take. Bain and Company looked at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they came up with the elements of the value pyramid. And they said these are the different values that you can unlock, not just a monetary revenue value, but a lot of other things, such as aspirational value, the emotional, the ethical, the moral, all the different kinds of values that you unlock. And they are as important as the revenue that we generate in organizations. So it's this kind of conversation needs to happen and needs to be initiated through the design team, and that's where the responsible design leadership comes in. If you're responsible and if you're not designing, then it'll be just talk. If you're designing, if you're probably not responsible, and if you don't have leadership rigor, then probably you don't have the influence. But when you combine all of them, you're responsible and use the design practices and think like a leader. Actually, then you can craft a change that we want in this world. So what is responsibility? Responsibility is actually having an obligation to do something, and then having that the control and having the passion to and the belief that you can change and to be standing up for it, right? So there are some examples for us to look from that angle. Don Norman is working on the system called the Design X. So he was the one who spoke about initially usability is important, the utility and the function, the usability of design was the most important thing, is what he spoke about. Then he went on to speak of the fact that it is the emotional quotient that the design unlocks. That's the most important. So he spoke about the framework of visceral, behavioral, and reflective. He came up with that framework, and he wrote the book of Design of Everyday Things and so on, Don Norman. And now that's where I really admire him. He has gone beyond that and saying that it's not enough to unlock emotional value in individuals, but actually solve some serious problems in the society today. The biggest problems that are there today, for example, in Africa, there are lots of malnourished kids. So how do you solve the problem of them using design? Now, are we all capable enough to solve that? We are not probably, we don't have the knowledge to do that. But what he has proposed is this idea called the Design X, where the designers become the facilitators of community experts, and you're part of the community. You allow the community experts and facilitators and coaches to solve the problem for that community. So you start looking at the community and start designing and helping design solutions with the community. And that's what he's calling as the Design X, where you can probably solve the biggest problems that are there in the society today. And if you ask Yuval Harari, what are the biggest problems? There are three big problems, right? One is the climate change, the nuclear wars, and the technological disruption. The three big problems. And is there a way for design to solve those problems as opposed to the smaller ones that we actually end up solving? So that is the question that he took up and then This is his framework, and is being evolved. So please join in. DesignX is a conversation that's going on. Join in. He's asking for people to come and contribute as well. Now, the other example I have, a favorite example of mine is Patagonia. So we spoke a lot about, yesterday we spoke about AI and the unsold inventory and all of that stuff that is out there, which is very important. It's better to sell the unsold inventory than to burn it out, right? We heard that. But probably even what is even better is to not to oversell and actually use up a lot of natural resources. It takes about 7,000 liters or so to make one jeans, right? So make a jeans pant. So what Patagonia did is they said, we want to, they are the makers of hiking gear and um, new clothing for adventure sports and the high, the highly adventurous sort of sports such as mountaineering and hiking, etc. So they came up with this concept called the worn wear, where they said, do not buy new things if you don't need to. We will fix your old things for you. So they are the makers of new gear, but they said don't waste it until so use it as much as you can. So they created an entire thing called the worn wear, where they said where it probably is hurting their business, right? When they create the secondhand thing and they start repairing your stuff, their new business gets hurt. But still, they took a call in the interest of the society and in the environment. They were courageous to go with this particular idea of the worn wear. Right? So that for me is responsible design and the way the way you show your commitment. Right? So that's responsibility. And then if you look at what is design and how this can come alive, design is the intent behind an outcome. That's what we speak in IBM, and that's really what design is, right? If you do it consciously, then it becomes design. If you do it unconsciously, you also get some really good outcomes sometimes unconsciously, but we don't call it design. Design is when it is done consciously. So in that consciousness, I think we've got to move on and actually look at it as a public conversation and start looking at taking on the biggest challenges that are seen. And we have IKEA here trying to look at what can they do with the self-driving cars, autonomous cars. So can we create a mobile hotel, for example, or a mobile hospital, so that you can reach to the deepest parts of the world where the healthcare is not accessible? So they're working on different kinds of concepts through the act of designing, through the craft of designing. They're bringing in the world of furniture and the world of the autonomous cars. So that's what IKEA is doing. I'll just move on. Center for Humane Tech. I had showed a couple of these in my previous talk as well. Is also experimenting with thought process around what if technology what if technology played on your team? That's what they say. What if it was in your team? And they have a few concepts that you can look at. And once you have a look at these, their volume. Sorry? Oh, okay.
John remembers, I need to ask Nancy for that document before I forget. There's this all or nothing choice, because if he doesn't ask her right now, he is going to forget. So John either holds on to that thought and is left with the burden on his mind of remember to ask Nancy or remember to ask Nancy, or he can get it off his mind and interrupt Nancy. So what does he do? He bulldozes her attention. And that's what we're doing all the time. We're bulldozing each other's attention. With text, with chat, messaging, and all sorts of digital interpersonal communication. And every time we do that, there's a serious cost. There's a woman named Gloria Mark at UC Irvine who does this research on interruption science. And her research shows that it takes us about 23 minutes on average to resume our focus after being interrupted. It also shows that if we get a whole bunch of external interruptions in an hour, the next hour will self-interrupt ourselves more. Maybe you can relate to feeling like you've lost your whole day to a combination of interruptions and self-interruptions. So how do we fix this? Let's say we introduce Nancy with a new choice, and Nancy can mark that she's focused. Now John still needs to ask her for that document, except now when he hits send, he sees that it will hold the message and deliver it as soon as Nancy is no longer focused. Now You're all probably thinking, wait a second, Nancy would never do this because she's worried she's going to miss something. What if there's something important or an emergency? What if that's all communicated up front, and she knows John has a way of escalating any message? She can be focused and know for sure that if something important comes in, she'll get the interruption she needs. This creates, it's instead of mindless or accidental interruptions, there's conscious interruptions, right? It's also changed the design question. We've changed the goal from let's make it really easy to send a message to one another, which is a pretty good goal. But we've upgraded that goal to help people communicate with each other well. What if technology was on your team to help you live by your values?
These are some examples. The video is not playing on WebEx. I'm not going to play on this, but these are examples, right? So when there is an interruption in the morning on your phone, we go through it all the time. You have this WhatsApp message and Slack and Facebook messages, Instagram, you name it, right? You're connected so much. When there is that ping that comes, you have to make a choice to see it or not, right? So you're actually making a choice, and that is already an interruption. The moment you start thinking of it, you're already interrupted. So this are small little things. So the design is the delight in design is in all of these little details. Actually, it's not the big things that we speak about, but actually the details. And in those little details is where the delight of design actually resides. And therefore, it is important that we start thinking on all of these aspects. So here, we are also talking about if technology was on your side, and what if it respected your values. For example, you want to be fit, even more fit in Google Maps or in the maps that you use. Is there a way that you can fit in the small idea of an exercise that you get, from going from one place to another? Then that can change the way you think, right? So you want to go from one place to another. It takes 10 minutes to walk, but then you don't want to. Probably you still want to take your bike or your car. Is it better to walk because it gives you more exercise? And then you can also finish a podcast on your way, which is 10 minutes spending on your podcast. So you can also finish that. So you can kind of connect different kinds of systems to actually bring out the values that you care for as and when we know more about you using the data in a most intelligent way. So I'm not going to play that video because it's anyway not being seen in the WebEx. So we'll keep moving from there. The third thing I spoke about was responsible design and leadership, right? And that's very important. Leadership is rigor. Leadership is the purpose of why something exists, and then it's the rigor that you have and the courage that you have to go through till the last level of till the last mile to bring that thing to life. And we have the example of Carlos Rodriguez Pastor. So he is the CEO of Intercorp. Intercorp is a group in Peru, and they have very interesting philosophy around design. And as he says here, he employs his thinking not to make more money, but actually to make the middle class families in Peru stronger. And that's a very big ideal to live up to. And he started off as a bank CEO. It's called the Interbank in Peru. And when he started off, it was still very. It was one of the smallest banks in Peru, and then he brought it up. It is the fourth biggest bank right now in Peru. They introduced internet banking way ahead of everybody else, and they employ design thinking quite a bit. They have come up with the schools, K-12 schools, called the Innova schools, using design thinking led schools, and they're working with IDEO on that. You can see the idea, right? It is not about, as I said, spread more products and services of the organization, but actually to make the democracy stronger. If the middle class families of Peru become stronger, then the democracy becomes stronger in a country which is plagued by military coups all the time. So the only way you can go forward is to actually do all of these things. So that requires courage and leadership and long-term thinking as well. So they have this thing called the La Victoria Lab, where they strive to improve the lives of Peruvian families through human-centered innovation. So how do we do all of these things? So that's where all this comes together. And as I said, it's a conversation I want to open up. and not really say this is exactly the way to do. There are some tools for us to use. I'll walk us through, but it is a conversation over a period of time that we want to get to. If we can't do responsible design, can we at least do no harm design? That's the question that we all need to keep asking. So for that, you got to look at the macro environment and the micro environment. When we do our research today, we still do individual in-depth research, but do we do this kind of a broad research, the steepled analysis that is required, the social, technological, economic, environmental, political, legal, all of these things, right? Ethical, demographic. Do we combine all of them? Now, of course, you might be wondering, it takes so much more time now, right? But that time is worth investing as opposed to, getting it wrong later on and actually facing a lot of backlash as is happening today in some of the organizations. So this is something can we build as a practice and start looking at. So that's the first thing. Look at the research, and when you do this research, you start seeing signals and wildcards and trends. And then that will give you an idea on what could happen. Right? That could probably have told if they had used this, probably it would have told Uber that maybe this trends in India is to maximize the kind of incentive structures, and therefore it could lead to all of these things, and therefore it is important to avoid that. So some of these trends you can catch when you start doing that. The second thing is to align all the stakeholders. Today, we align the stakeholders of the business stakeholders as well as the individual users, but not enough. In service design, we go beyond, we look at the partners, distributors, all of that. But do we look at the society? Do we look at the planet? What's good for the planet? We don't look at that right now. And we can look at that and align all of them into what is good for each one of them. And not just the business, but also, as I said, all of them. And again, it is just improving from where we are. It is not about doing this jumbo exercise and trying to boil the ocean, but from where we are today, can we improve from where we are and start introducing these kind of conversations? Once you do these two things, you now start looking at the futures, the scenario-based futures, in the different the horizon planning, as they say, right? What's going to happen now, in the near future, and the far future, right? In the next 50 years, what's going to happen? So you sort of look at all of that, and then you backcast from there, so that you look at what is your preferred future. So there are all these possible futures, as you can see, but what is your preferred future that you want? Not what will happen because of 3D printing or AI, but what should happen. And that is where the responsibility automatically kind of comes in, backed along with it. Once you know what should happen, you start backcasting from there. In 2029, I want this. In 2035, I want this to happen. And you start backcasting from there, as opposed to the forecasting that we do. And when you start backcasting, you actually take actions so that you create that particular blueprint to go so far. And you can start seeing it even in the near future. You don't have to go till 2035. You can just go till the next 3 years, right? 2023. And what happens, and start backcasting from there. So that is the way you can start creating your preferred futures. And therefore, if we start looking us as designers as people who take a set of requirements and give outputs, we probably will not be able to make this change. We need to start looking at ourselves as leaders of people who bring in change, leaders with a vision, and therefore that's when you can influence all the stakeholders that are there along with us. Once you do all of that, you can also use these guides that are now coming out. It's called the Human Design Guide. This is from the Center for Human Tech I spoke about. You can actually look at the product of the future, the value proposition, and all the things that it has: emotional, the attention, the sense making, decision making, social reasoning, the group dynamics, all these different things that are there. So use this checklist and look at your product that you came up with through the whole system you designed. In that, every product, every screen, everything that you develop, does that seep in to that level of detail. As I said, the delight in design is in a lot of detail. So this is what you can use finally. And when you use all of these different tools, the end product will be so much better and far more responsible than what we are doing. It might seem a little overwhelming. It's like too much, right? You got to do all of these things, but that's how it is, right? So when we started designing many years ago, 20 years ago, you probably just did screens, and today we don't stop at screens. We create systems. That was a lot when we first discussed, but now it is commonplace. We always think in terms of systems, and the service and the entire service blueprint is how we think. Now you take the next level, right, and then go to this level of the need that we have. So that's once you do all of those things, then you can map where you want your client to be, where you want IBM to be, your partner to be, your distributor to be, and then say, when I do all of these things, you can map and say, my client will be actually driving transformation for the society. And think of it and visualize. It is so much better to have that conversation than to say, I'll make more money for you, right? So like it's so much better to say you are actually creating a change in the society. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much for listening to me. And if there are any questions on WebEx or here, probably I can take about 15 minutes. What we have about 15 minutes, but we can take some questions. We have some time. Do we have time?
I think another.
So do we have time for the questions? Okay, so there is. Yeah, but I'm just seeing on the WebEx if there is any questions. Okay, so number games have changed the work, but there's no guarantee in the quality. Yeah, but only the number, only the run. I think is a comment that says that it's too much of focus on numbers. Somebody said clap, clap. Thank you. Any links to refer, like where we can refer human design guide? I'll send these links. Bhupinder is asking, there are any links? I'll send these links, resources. Anyway, Sunny, you can probably send it to all. Are there any questions, any thoughts, comments? Do you agree with what I shared? Or
So, Sudhindra, very much, in fact, it was great to hear a lot of learnings for me personally. I completely agree to what you presented or thoughts. It's just that I think even you presented community X, but in real life, how many people are really willing to push that envelope, take that extra step? So if I take IBM as such as an organization, the maturity of design, and we go about responsible design, when the maturity of design is there to a mark. It's very from a day-to-day engagement perspective, it's very difficult for us to even help folks understand what design can bring to table. Because I think design, as you said, is too important to be left alone just for designers. And a designer actually becomes a leader eventually, right? Apart from the other roles, that futurist, a person who can speculate the future, all that thing is great. But the clients, they're still, they're not able to understand the power of design as such. So how do we tackle such situations when the client just still feels that we are probably design as a process, the responsible design part is still not come there. When you say I want my client to first was form giving, then design as a process, great. So we are somewhere between form giving and process.
Yeah.
And my client never understands responsible design, even though we are trying to educate, give them numerous examples.
Yeah.
So some examples which Ruchi, you and others did for Crompton was great. But how do we keep it consistent? How do we unlock this?
So the question is for people who are in the WebEx. I just want to repeat, summarize the question to. So the question is, are the clients now? Do they have the propensity to listen to this, and are they aligned to the responsible design idea? Whereas even now we are struggling to give the basics of foundational work of design. So again, you actually said we are somewhere in between design as form giving and design as strategy. Right? We were not even there 10 years ago. So we have moved somewhere, right? So only when we have these conversations will we be able to move there. So I'll give you an example, and that's a very important example that I came across recently. I was in the ITC. I stayed in ITC when I went to Mumbai last time. I was in discussions with ITC about 4 years ago, 5 years ago in my previous organization. They were talking about responsible luxury. They spoke about it. They did a lot of campaigns around it, but they didn't mean anything of it. Actually, I didn't see anything real about it. But this time when I stayed with them, I was super surprised. There was zero plastic in entire, in the room I stayed in all of ITC, whatever I saw, there was zero plastic. The bottles were nicely sealed glass bottles and not plastic. Even the toothbrush, right? It was wooden, not plastic. Everything was thoughtfully done. And they had actually moved on from there. Now, they made my life a little inconvenient. I'm not used to wooden brushes, right? And the plastic bottles are very easy, small, tiny ones you can carry. Glass is bigger, and you don't even know, all of that. So they had to take an extra step to make sure that it is clean, good water. It was inconvenient to me, but they took a call. They said, even if it's inconvenient to one person, it is good for society. And I really love that. I'm giving that example today, right? I paid a lot of money there, but still I'm giving that example. That is what I think. There are all the organizations, especially in the Western countries. And Susan, I'm sure, knows a lot more of it than we do. There is this whole discussion around sustainability and the fact that you've got to be environmentally friendly and all, right? So there is moments that are there. Consumers reject products that they believe is not doing social good. So if when that is the case, the businesses have no option but to listen. But when they are listening, what are we saying then when they're actually open to listening? Are we telling them the right things is the question, right? So I think that's where it is. So you're right. Not every client, every single day will be listening to that, but very soon that conversation will start. And therefore we need to be ready before then. That's my thought.
This kind of happened when started to advocate experience long back.
Yeah.
Then slowly companies started adopting. Where you could see companies talking about experience.
Yeah.
Rather than so similarly, I mean maybe we call it like responsible design. We can call it responsible business, and we can help companies think of responsible because they will look at it from the business angle. So
Yeah.
maybe we can call it responsible business and advocate it.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's one. And also, again, the fact is, if you do that, right, if it does make a lot of business sense because today Uber has a lot of backlash because of this. In Singapore, there is no Uber. They banned Uber, right? And the kind of things that are going on. So they made a lot of money. They made a lot of news because of the experience that they created. But somewhere this was not thought through, and all of that happened. So it does make a lot of business sense to actually adopt responsible design in the practices as well.
Thought, but can we comfortably say that designers are actually are to be blamed for this whole thing that's what like they're going through right now, right?
Yeah.
All the irresponsibility.
Yeah.
Or can we say that designers are blamed for because the designers of the past probably encouraged irresponsible design? Can we say that?
Yeah, see, there is that whole book now, Ruined by Design, by Mike Montero. And he talks about how designers probably didn't think through. I don't know if we want to blame or not, because as I said, design it's come with human-centered in it. That's a good thing, right? So at least we are having that conversation. I don't know in how many practices across the world where they're even talking about it. At least we're having that conversation. So I think it's a good thing. Again, we can always, in hindsight, it is easy to say what went wrong, but they did not have probably the tools to look at. Today, we have those tools. And if we don't do it today, I think that's a mistake.
How do we scale this in perception? Scale this idea of response.
Responsible design is one of the four things that is there in the whole set of disciplines is called the discursive design, right? So there's critical design, there is social design, there is responsible design, and there is speculative design. So there's four disciplines together. It's called the discursive design. This idea of design is a conversation. This is not about designing products and services that we're going to use, but actually it's about provoking people and to have a conversation. There is a role of this discipline of design. So when you want to, scale it up, the thing you need to do is have more of these conversations. Create products that are responsible versus which probably are, normal, and then show it to our clients, right? Create blueprints that are responsible blueprint. Can we create a responsible service blueprint versus a service blueprint which is purely aligned to design? And let people see that. I think it's about provoking. Once you provoke them and start getting them to align to this idea, then you can always move back and use the traditional forms of design, and then you can get the right output. But that's what the value of these design disciplines are.
Question of our clients really listening to this or not. There's a really large of thinking which is contrarian to the capitalist thinking. I think the recently concluded World Economic Forum Day was completely focused on the purpose of business. The purpose of business not being profit making for shareholders or for expansion and growth and numbers expected, but in terms of people, planet, profit. Is that your new chart of business? And that's something that organizations globally are really looking at. What that translates to is to the smallest unit, talking to your how to propagate it. How are we in this room practicing it as individuals, as designers, as human beings? Now, are we listening with more compassion? Are we speaking with more love? Are we and really getting into that whole realm of a very different way of thinking? And what we put in our vocabulary is the way we think. And so, the yesteryears were all about that whole revolution capturing the world. We've actually gone and captured the planet in the process. So, capitalistic thinking is about kill competition. That's what these schools taught us. Competition. How do you capture this? The vocabulary itself is contrarian to preservation. So I think that each of us are leaders, I believe, in purporting that thinking, and it's so beautifully all together. It's something made much easier for me personally to honestly think about it like this. And every conversation I have time to talk about it. In fact, when Mark Foster was here, I asked him the very same question. IBM's always been a torchbearer of change, much ahead of any other organization, and we've been known for that. Now, are we thinking about this? And to some extent, the cognitive enterprise point of view, 2.0, brings in enterprise experience and humanity, and the kind of leaders and people as IBMers we need to be able to execute that vision for companies. So I think if there is an organization thinking about it, I'm glad I'm in one. But each one of us are units of change. I believe, not just within IBM, but communities, wherever we are.
Yeah. Thank you, Suparna. That was very well said. In fact, there is one question here. I think kind of relates. How do we take a step to convince the electronic giants, the organizations, because again they're building products and which are non-repairable, and there's creating a lot of e-waste and so on. So there is that question as well. So again, all of this goes back to the responsibility part that they adopt, and like IBM. The other companies also have to do, like Apple, for example. They are creating products and products and products and products and products. They're just taking a lot of money from me, so they may as well, do something about it, right? But yeah, actually, it goes back to the consciousness and the conscience that they have.
I think they had this take on the chargers, like the C type versus Apple had a charging unit, so they wanted to standardize. But they realized that they can't do it because the amount of waste and the ripple effect it would have to have a standardized way of charging will be even worse for the customer.
Yeah.
So they shunned that idea.
Yeah.
I would like to add one thing. So when we this entire thing about propagating responsible design, what I see as a problem is that designers don't know how to sell business aspects of the design. So we know how to make presentations about what is good design, right? Like what is a good way to book a cab, or what is a good way to see a cab driver's rating. But we don't know how to show the business impact of that particular decision. So if I'm in a room with a couple of clients, if I say that this would be a good way to design, they will ask me how is it good for my business, and
Yeah.
that is where the entire game ends, right? So, and if you also look at when you say leadership, leadership is there to take responsibility of the business. Leadership, the way companies work right now, to face the truth, we are corporations, and like what we do in the market, it's a money making exercise. So when we say leadership, it has to include that aspect of business as well. So design schools never taught us business. So if I have to become a responsible design leader, that means I have to understand business.
Yeah.
And that means I have to know how to translate my design decisions to illustrate or give a demo of the business case.
Yeah.
Until that happens, they won't listen to me.
And that's a great point. And IX is about business design, by the way, right? So we are propagating that already. And the thought here is, and we'll hear more of it from Billy anyway. The thought is that we are creating the impact in business, and therefore you're absolutely right. We got to scale up there quickly, and then scale up even further to start thinking of the responsibility part that comes along with it. You're right. So design schools should play a role, but also, not everything can be done solved by design schools or that short period, actually.
No, it comes from, it actually comes that transition should happen once we start working in the industry.
Yeah.
Like designers should have some training oriented towards business.
Yeah.
So that we can actually see the numbers in design and show design through numbers.
Yeah.
Because that is the language that the market speaks.
I also feel the vice versa, the opposite, like business.
So that
That's not-
is
Yeah. That's true.
But Parashar, to your point, I think digital strategy and IX as the overall growth pillar of our services business that we all belong to has brought together exactly what you're saying. In strategy thinking, design, and technology, the cornerstones of how we create transformation. And so in our team, we have strategy consultants who understand business. They come from B school background, you guys come from B schools, and then there are folks who come from B schools. Bringing these three disciplines together, the organization has created a business unit which does exactly what we're talking about. Therefore, but the challenge is on a day-to-day basis, are we working together enough? Maybe we are working with knowledge design, but are we working together? Then you have access. That's the change each of us need to make, and in every engagement, we need to necessarily embed all that we already have within the company, within the business unit, to affect what you're saying. So, if you've speculated and seen the future, how does it make sense for a CFO today to implement it? That dialogue and that narrative comes in. At the end of the day, all of us need to be, we can't be jack of all trades. We have to have that sensibility. And we have 250 consultants in CIC. And many of them are Chanakya, some of these schools are trying to the team has it. We integrate that.
I think
Thank you.
another thought comes is that numbers are already very complex. That design in one case help, in other cases. So I think from what we have done, the projects and so on, I think we should see how we can kind of take these two large IBM projects. Like we have embedded things like quality and security.
Yeah.
It should become part of
You're so right.
because that's going to kind of make the whole
Make it happen in Sri Lanka.
goes, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very small place where you can always start
Yeah.
certain things. I think that will kind of also make the outcome much better rather than just doing a project.
Yeah.
So it will be driving much more, the whole benefits, like you said, not just building something.
Yeah.
But once it And that will give you much more pointers to kind of see, okay, these are the things that this project,